everyone, Robin here from Cheese from Scratch, and I'm so excited to be part of the Dairy Collective this month. So it is Dairy Month. June is Dairy Month, and the Mennonite Farmhouse and the Inquisitive Farmwife have worked really hard to gather a different dairy theme video every day of this month. And so today is my day, and I said, hey, I'm going to teach you guys how to make a Clabber Culture. So all of the other videos this month, there's so many different ones. There is stuff on milk cows, dairy goats, sourcing raw milk, making things with the raw milk, so yogurt and butter, ice cream, all sorts of things. And I'm going to teach you guys how to keep a Clabber culture on your counter, because I think this is a really important skill to have. If you have access to raw milk, you should be keeping a Clabber culture on your counter. So what is a Clabber culture? A Clabber culture is a sour milk culture that I keep on my counter, and I feed it every day, and I keep it healthy by feeding it. It's sort of like the sourdough equivalent, but in cheese making. So sourdough bread has sourdough starter, cheese has Clabber culture. So if you have ever made cheese before, you know that you can go onto a cheese supply website and you can buy all sorts of different freeze-dried starter cultures to make your cheese. Well, this Clabber culture, it takes away that need to going onto the cheese supply website, and it allows you to source your own culture off of your own homestead from your own milk. So the only ingredient you need to make a Clabber culture is good quality raw milk. There is bonus points if you can take this raw milk directly from the udder, bring it up to the house, just strain it to keep it clean, and then put it into a jar. If it's still a little bit nice and warm from the udder, it's going to ferment a little bit quicker for you, and it just works that much better. So when a calf drinks its mother's milk, it's going to turn that milk into cheese in that little calf's stomach. And one of the reasons for that is that milk is coming out of the udder at the exact right temperature to be able to make cheese. So when we can kind of mimic that and follow it as closely as possible, all things in cheese just become a little bit easier. So today I'm actually using cold milk because I already used my Clabber culture this morning to make cheese. So all I'm going to do is have raw milk in a jar. This is just liquid raw milk. I just put it in. And all I'm going to do is put a loose cover, just like if you're making a sourdough starter, over top, elastic band, and put that on top. Now, what you're going to do with this first ferment of your Clabber culture is you're going to leave it on the counter until it coagulates. When it coagulates, it's going to look like yogurt. So like this. Kind of jelly-like. Little jelly shake. So this first time when you're making it, it's kind of like when you first start a sourdough starter right off the bat. It takes about a week before you can use it. So this first ferment is going to take probably 3 to 4 days before you actually see the coagulation. And the reason for that is that there are so many different lactic bacteria and yeasts and fungus that are present in raw milk. It's such a good ecology. Well, all those little baby lactic bacterias and funguses and molds, they're all little babies in this milk. This is fresh milk. The cow just made it. And they need a chance to be able to kind of start to feed, start to ferment my milk a little bit. So it's going to take a little bit of time, that first ferment. So 3 to 4 days, you are going to see coagulation like this. And this jar, I've scooped out of already, that's why it kind of looks like there's a little bit of separation, but it will be like a jar of just nice solid yogurt. you will have a nice curd mass in there. And so when your milk has coagulated, you know that it's time to take some of that Clabber Culture and feed it to new milk. So pretend this is brand new milk. I just poured it into the jar. I just got it from the udder. Again, bonus points if it is nice and warm from the udder. And you're going to take some of that Clabber Culture and you're going to add it into this new milk. Now the ratio for how much you should take of your Clabber is 1 to 50. So unless you are a math wizard, that's going to be kind of hard to figure out, so I just eyeball it. I say about a little bit more than a tablespoon for my jar. So I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to stir it. And again, lid on. And now this stuff is going to sit on the counter and it's going to ferment a lot quicker than the first stuff. And the reason for that is now it has some lactobacteria that are already activated in there. And they're going to start to feed a little bit quicker and you'll probably get coagulation in about 24 hours with this second batch. So eventually what you are going to have is you're going to have a milk that coagulates in about 12 hours. So at 12 hours, you will see that coagulation, and it might take like a week before you get it to being fermenting that fast. So you don't want, up until this point, when you have it coagulating a little bit quicker, you don't want to use it for cheese making. You could use this discard for all sorts of things around the kitchen. You could use it for baking with raw milk because it has that separation of cream on the top and milk on the bottom. The top is basically sour cream, and it will be the greatest sour cream you will ever eat in your entire life. So you could use it for sour cream. I make cottage cheese out of it. You could just use it for all sorts of things around the homestead kitchen. That's what you can use the discard for. Now, after about a week of feeding and fermenting and discarding, feeding, fermenting, discarding, you will be able to start to use this for cheese making. And again, the ratio is 1 to 50. So instead of adding a mesophilic or thermophilic culture into my cheese, I add in a Clabber culture. So I add in 1 part Clabber to 50 parts milk. So if that's a really big pot of milk, I'm adding almost all of this in. And always just keeping a little bit back so that you can keep that Clabber culture going, and you can keep it going pretty much indefinitely. It's really difficult to kill. So one of the cool things about keeping a Clabber culture is that because there is so many different lactic bacteria present in raw milk, there is bacteria that are warm-loving bacteria and bacteria that are cooler-loving bacteria. So we call these thermophilic and mesophilic. And if you were going to go onto a cheese supply website and buy these, you would see that there's a whole bunch of different varieties of each of them. What you can actually do with using a Clabber culture in your cheese making is you can use your cheese making technique to kind of isolate which type of bacteria you use. So some cheeses will have you heat the milk to a warmer temperature, which is for thermophilic bacteria, and the thermophilic bacteria that are present in this Clabber will actually be the ones that thrive because the situation is kind of, the environment is more, is better for them. I don't know what the word is. It's better for them. If you wanted a mesophilic cheese, well then you would be heating it to a bit of a lower temperature, and that would be allowing the mesophilic, the lower temperature loving bacteria to thrive. So you're using your cheese making technique, but the gist of it is that you can use Clabber culture to make all of your cheeses. Now, there is one exception, and that exception is that it needs to be good quality Clabber culture. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a science lesson. So fermentation is how we are able to preserve our milk in cheese making. And before refrigeration, there was fermentation. Fermentation is really important for cheese making and for us to be able to preserve our milk. So with cheese making, there's basically 2 stages of fermentation. The first stage is called bacterial fermentation. This is when lactic bacteria, which if you have ever fermented like vegetables or anything, you kind of know what a lactic bacteria is. But a lactic bacteria is a type of bacteria that likes to feed on sugar. With cheese making, we're also dealing with lactic bacteria. So lactic bacteria come into your milk, or in the case of raw milk, they're already present there, and they start to feed on the sugar in the milk. The lactose is the sugar in the milk, so they feed on the lactose, and as they feed on it, they ferment it into lactic acid. So this thus acidifies the milk, and it sets the stage for the second stage of fermentation, which is called fungal fermentation. So fungal fermentation refers to mold, to yeast, and it kind of it's something that you use with almost every aged cheese recipe you're going to make. It's kind of once bacterial fermentation has done the fermenting, the fungal fermentation starts. And bacterial fermentation only lasts for a little bit, because what lactic bacteria do is they feed on that lactose, which means they eat all of the lactose in that milk, or most of the lactose in that milk. There's not a lot of food left, and they make the environment really acidic. And they can't survive in an acidic environment, so they start to die off. And as they start to die off, this leaves room for other yeasts and funguses that can survive in those harsh acidic environments without those big sugars like lactose. It leaves room for them to start to come in. And I'm going to show you something here. So I have something that is like a weird, gross science experiment on my counter. So I have some separated over-fermented cream here. This was kind of an accident. I forgot it on the counter for a little bit too long, and then I was like, I'm just going to save it for this video. Anyways, if you look close, you can see that there's some bubbles in there. So those bubbles are caused by yeast. You can see it's a little separated there. Those yeast bubbles are caused by CO2, which is a byproduct of the yeast feeding in that milk. So if you look at your Clabber Culture, and you see even one tiny little bubble in there, you know that hey guys, can you go do that outside please? So if you look into your Clabber Culture and you see even one tiny little yeast bubble in there, one tiny bubble, because lactic bacteria, they don't make bubbles. If you see one tiny bubble, you know that the lactic bacteria have kind of done their job. They're starting to die off, they're not as strong, and now yeasts are starting to come into that milk. That milk has gone from its bacterial fermentation stage to its fungal fermentation stage. Well, with cheese making, we want lactic bacteria to use as starter cultures for our milk. So we need to take that milk, or this Clabber, when it is filled with good lactic bacteria. Not when it is starting to have those lactic bacteria die off and not be as strong, but when they're really strong, when they have just coagulated that milk and they haven't had a chance to start to die off. So that is the rule for using Clabber for cheese making. You need to make sure that it hasn't over fermented. Again, if you see even one tiny little yeast bubble in there, it's no longer good for cheese making. You can save it. All you have to do is you take a scoop of it, you feed it to new milk, and you allow those lactic bacteria to again coagulate your milk. And then you take it right at coagulation. Not when it has one little yeast bubble in it, but right at coagulation. So if you get tired of feeding your Clabber Culture, you can put it in the fridge, just like a sourdough starter. So you can feed it, you can let it ferment to coagulation, and you can throw it in the fridge. It will last in there for probably about a week before you need to take it out, feed it again, let it ferment into coagulation, and then you can put it back in the fridge. Now, if you're going to use it for cheese making, you're probably going to want to feed it a couple times and get it strong again before you use it for cheese making if you're just pulling it out of the fridge. You can also freeze it. It will last, I think, about 3 months in the freezer. And when you bring it out, you're just going to add it into your new milk, let it ferment, and again, a few feeds before it's good for cheese making again. Thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, if you've ever made Clabber, if you have any tips and tricks as well. People can read down in the comment section to find anything. Thank you to the Inquisitive Farmwife and Mennonite Farmhouse for organizing this collaboration. Be sure to check out their account for a full list of all the different accounts that are posting videos this month of June, and check out some of those other videos, because when do you get like an entire month filled with videos all from different farmhouses about dairy? So that's pretty cool.